the most significant story in U.S. history, all encapsulated in this book. Mr. Ralph Pezzullo today on the David Rutherford Show. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that you have to begin to come to grips with is that our country is in peril. We are under attack from a collective conspiracy that expands the entire globe. And my guest today is a man that had the courage to partner with the two men that have conducted the most intense international investigation around the world to bring their story to life in a way that you and I can understand how catastrophic the situation is that we face within our election systems, not just in America, but worldwide. So without further ado, it's my honor to welcome New York Times bestselling author of over 30 books, and one of my favorite books of all time, a book called Jawbreaker, about Gary Bernstein, who ran the invasion in Afghanistan, Mr. Ralph Pezzullo. Sir, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
David, it's a pleasure, and thank you for your service to our country, and it's really an honor to be here.
I appreciate that. What's interesting is we all hit a point, I think, over a period of time, the more we're aware of just how nefarious the world is, that, we begin to realize, wow, there are organizations, countries, political leaders, international criminal consortiums that are participating in all different types of things that not even are just illegal, but are outright scandalous and treasonous. But this one, in my opinion, is the biggest story in American history. This is something that if we don't get our hands around, the country's over. Could be the next election, could be the one after that. So could you first tell the audience how this story fell into your lap and what compelled you to want to do it?
Okay, well, as you mentioned, David, I've known Gary Bernstein for 20 years, and he is just an amazing person. Probably the greatest CIA operations officer of our generation, and, a very thoughtful, dynamic person. Right. So, Gary and I talk over the years and visit one another when we're nearby. But this came through his partner. So in last, I guess it was April or May, I had a friend from the DEA I live in Los Angeles, and he was visiting. And he said, I want you to meet a friend of mine for lunch. He is the greatest source that the DEA has ever had. Wow. He has helped us solve so many drug cases. The guy is a genius. I said, sure, I'd love to meet him. So we go to lunch. The gentleman is named Martin Rodil. He is Venezuelan by birth. And we start talking. We kind of hit it off right away. And I said, what are you working on, Martin? And he goes, election fraud. For 3 years, I've been investigating election fraud. And of course, my ears perk up because there's a lot of Americans, like I'm sure you as well, David, I had questions about some of our recent elections that it just seemed off to me. And he said, what are you doing tomorrow? I want to show you a 4-hour presentation that we've put together to show members of Congress. And I said, okay. I cleared my schedule. I met him, and he took me through like a 4-hour PowerPoint, just packed with evidence. And at the end of it, I was, of course, I was stunned. I was just like, oh my God, our country is under attack by foreign enemies, and we're not even aware of it. And so I said to Martin, I said, well, what can I do to help you? And he said, we want you to write a book. I didn't know that Gary was involved at that point. We walked outside, and he called, and Martin made a phone call, and he said, oh, Gary says hello. And I said, Gary Burnson? And he goes, yeah, he's my business partner. And I'm like, okay, so Gary's involved in this. And he said, yes. And of course, that just, solidified the fact that, I have to do this. And then they showed me the evidence and I started writing the book. The intention was that the book would come out before the election of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
I found a publisher who said he would do it. Martine went to New York and showed him all the evidence. Mm-hmm. And the publisher was like, oh yeah, we got to get this out before the election. I wrote the book in basically, 6 weeks, 2 months.
Wow.
Just working every day, trying to meet the deadline and feeling the importance of it. Right. And then everything was ready, copy edited, cover, publicity, etc. And then the publisher calls me one day and says, we got to shut this down. And I'm like, why? Gary and I met with him, met with his lawyer. It just didn't, they didn't really have a solid reason. They're worried. They're saying we're going to get sued. Mm-hmm. At that point, Gary and I had already done a series of videos. We weren't sued. And so basically the book was held up for a year until I could get out of the contract. And I had to publish it myself, and it came out in September. That's the book that you've got in front of you.
What for me, and I obviously with the news cycle, what it is today, which I think is intentional in so many different ways, right? If you flood the system, nothing stays in the consciousness of Americans for more than the amount of times it takes to scroll up or scroll down. Mm-hmm. And so, but for me, so I first saw it when I saw the interview you all recently did with Lara Logan, and I had met Lara once a long time ago. I had interviewed her when I used to do a podcast with Marcus Luttrell from The Lone Survivor. And really, that was a moment where I really kind of came to appreciate the intensity with which she approached journalism. Oh, yeah. And so I saw it. And then obviously Emerald Robinson is covering in depth a lot of all of this as well too. So I sat through the interview and my mouth was just agape. I literally I think within the first, 10 minutes of Gary talking, I had ordered it on Amazon and I was excited to read it. And I think I went through it in like 3.5 days. And I think what is so brilliant about your writing, and I found that very similar when you did Jawbreaker as well, is just how proficient you lay it out to where it's understandable, because the technical, the technicality of the corporate structures of Smartmatic or Dominion, or where how it relates to different electoral organizations within Venezuela. Like, it's a very complicated landscape.
Yes.
But what you do is you synthesize it and you drop it in such an easy way to understand that it made complete sense. Like, because obviously I too had found the abnormalities. First off, I got locked out of social media about a month and a half before the 2020 election, along with many, many other GWAT influencers and podcasters. They throttled all of us. They shut us all down just to quiet us so we wouldn't have a voice to, get the public going. And so when it happened, I mean, just what the F curve alone on it was so profound, and everything else, like, you knew something was off, but they had such an army of censorship ready to employ as they did. When you came into this, they had already been going at this for several years.
Yes.
What did they say to you? Like, what were you apprehensive about in partnering with them? Was there anything that you were worried about by joining them in this endeavor?
As soon as I saw the presentation, as soon as I saw the evidence, it just struck me as true. I felt like terrible for our country that we had been attacked this way. And I just felt, look, I have to do this, and I just have faith in God and the truth. I've always been, that's my guide, is the truth. Just find the truth. I try to stay non-political, open-minded. And I just figured, okay, this is the truth. I can't, I don't see any, of course I checked everything out that I could myself and spoke to other people and, and I know Gary and I felt like these guys have, they're real patriots. Gary has been willing to put his life down for the country. And, we are under attack and the American people need to be made aware of this. And I knew already that, Gary had told me that they had already been to, FBI, members of Congress, and basically been told to, shut up and go away. I kind of understood that this would be, kind of a dangerous, interesting ride, but I just felt like, hey, what's more important? I love this country and, this is where, I put my stake down here. So let's do it. Let's do it.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
I love that, Ralph. Like that's the thing, man. I think there's so many people out there that are out there trying to become, whether, they're freelance journalists or new citizen journalists or, the influence that James O'Keefe is having around the country. And so people are compelled because they realize just how corrupt all the systems are. But it's like to have the expertise of you and Gary and Martine, it really, I think, is such a powerful group. And I really appreciate you wanting to, having the courage to do this. So let's get into this. All right. So who are the main players as you begin down the road in the book that people need to be aware of? Where does this plot originate, and then how does it begin to morph into action itself?
Okay, well, it really begins with the election of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela in 1998. He was elected in 1999. He took power. And Hugo Chavez was a, charismatic military officer in a country of tremendous wealth and natural resources. Venezuela has the highest oil reserves of any country in the world. He because of his sort of psychological makeup, he was the product of a illegitimate, of an affair that his mother had outside of the marriage. And so his father always rejected him. And Fidel Castro, became a father figure for Hugo Chavez and cultivated that relationship because Castro saw if he could partner with Venezuela with their wealth, this could really give him a boost to sort of expanding his sort of socialist government agenda throughout Latin America. And it really started in 2004. The Venezuelans faced a referendum, and Hugo Chavez was going to lose. The polls show that he was way behind, and Castro and his intelligence service were monitoring everything. And they went to Hugo Chavez and they said, "Hey, you're going to lose, and you're going to be out of power. So you got to come up with something." And Hugo Chavez was sort of like, well, help me. Like, what do I do? And they came up with the idea of, well, there's this new technology that they use in electronic voting machines. And if we can control the software in those machines and design it in a certain way, maybe we can steal the election in this quiet way that nobody will be able to detect.
Wow.
And they hired 3 Venezuelan computer engineers, Antonio Mujica, Alfredo Jose Anzola, and Roger Piñate. They were all graduates of Simón Bolívar University in Caracas, which is sort of their equivalent of MIT. Very highly educated guys. And they took on this task and they came up with software that was installed in Olivetti kind of touch screen banking machines. They distribute these throughout Venezuela, and they were able to steal the election, an election that was carefully monitored, but they did it in such a way that you couldn't see the evidence of the steal, right?
Wow.
And of course, Hugo Chavez was very grateful. He gave them $200 million and basically said, let's see if you can perfect this software, and let's see if we can use it in other elections throughout Latin America. And that's what they did.
Gosh.
And so in the early 2000s, you know, for those who follow Latin American political history, there were a series of leftist leaders, Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua being one of them, Evo Morales in Bolivia, a whole series of them that were elected in elections where the polls showed them behind. You know, so it was kind of like, this is curious. Is this like but nobody knew really what was going on. Well, for Castro, this was brilliant. I mean, he's been trying to infiltrate, spread his socialist communist ideology throughout Latin America for years with guerrilla movements.
Right.
I mean, this is an easy way to do it, right? It seems
the
like
easiest.
Very legitimate. The election monitors in all these countries, and they didn't find they couldn't find the steal, right? How they were doing this, and so they perfected it in Latin America, and then in 2006 they said, let's try it in the United States. Mm-hmm. And these gentlemen, same three Venezuelan engineers, they started a company in Boca Raton called Smartmatic, and that's where it started. And it was always, and it still remains true today, the software is really owned by the government of Venezuela.
That was the thing that really was unbelievable to me, is that through all the different, and we'll get into that eventually, you can explain the different iterations of the companies and morphing and being bought out, but that the source code remained proprietary through each one of these sales. That is the fascinating thing to me.
Yes, that's the key. That's the key.
Right.
So the source code is owned by Venezuela. And the source code, anybody who's a computer software engineer will know, is sort of the DNA of the software. You can modify it, you can change it, but it's sort of the instructions, the core of the system. And through all these sort of corporate shell games and they're very sophisticated. They knew which countries they could register in that would be able to hide the corporate ownership. And they chose the Netherlands because you don't have to reveal the owners of the software. So they did all this kind of stuff. They came into the United States. Immediately, they were sort of questions were raised by Carolyn Mahoney, a representative from New York. She went to the Treasury Department and she said, something about this doesn't seem right. You need to do an investigation of this software. And then there was also a political officer at the embassy in Caracas who wrote a long cable in 2006, basically saying, why is the United States accepting this this company on face value? This is a Venezuelan-owned company. Why are they running elections in the United States? Now, nothing ever happened. We don't know what happened with that cable. It was approved by the Ambassador Brownlee at the time. It went to the State Department and got swallowed up in the bureaucracy. But so there were people back in the beginning who were saying, hey, there's something funny going on here. Also, they applied to run elections in California. And at that time, the Secretary of State of California had to do a review of any election software that was going to be used in the state. And they hired engineers from MIT and Berkeley and so on, top computer engineers. And they came back and basically wrote a report saying, hey, this software looks like it was designed to steal elections.
Wow.
It's got so many back doors in it. This is garbage. You don't want this running your elections in your state.
What did you guys ever find? Who were the people that greenlit the machines and the software coming into the United States? Did you ever get down to that first person in whatever state or area or election it was that government employee was like, yeah, we're good with this? Because it seems like that's the linchpin, the first person who says, oh no, we're going to use it, and then the county next to it, the county next to the state,
right,
and whatever. Yeah.
Right. Well, what they did, they're very smart. These people. This is not a casual. This isn't a couple guys in a basement. These are hundreds of engineers, and as they got going, they got support from China, they got support from Iran, they got support from Russia. It became this criminal conspiracy because these countries who are all enemies of the United States saw, wow, what an amazing way to run like hybrid warfare, to basically corrupt and destroy the United States from within, right? Which we have experienced over the last 15 years, right? So there was a lot of corruption involved, David. You have to go kind of state by state, who approved. There were some examples. I don't want to name names, but you can look at, like in Georgia.
Yeah, for sure. Fulton County. Right. Antrim County, Michigan, Colorado, the real hotbeds of those contested. Arizona.
They knew all the key districts. Like there are 3,000 voting districts in the United States, and there are about really a dozen or more that determine the outcome of our elections, presidential elections. They knew where to go. They knew what districts to get the contracts to run the elections in, and they paid off. I mean, like I said, they have tremendous amount of money behind them because you've got all the money, the Venezuelan money, the oil money, plus they were getting money from China. China pitched in $200 million.
600 million or whatever it is.
Yeah. Huge amounts of money. And so the first U.S. election that they ran was in Cook County, Illinois, when Obama was running in the Democratic primary against Hillary Clinton. At the time, Hillary Clinton had been, the first lady. She'd been a senator from New York. She was a very, prominent person and clearly the favorite to win the Democratic nomination. Obama at the time was a first-term senator. He'd only been in office 2 years.
Right.
And they stole the election for Obama. And so
that sparks all those Manchurian candidate conspiracies that are out there, and his past and who his mother was influenced by, and Bill Ayers and all, the whole communist indoctrination, from the beginning. I mean, all
I can tell you is that Hugo Chavez's, one of his closest aides, was told by Hugo Chavez before the election, I'm going to elect the first black president in the United States.
Oh my gosh. He did it. Oh my gosh. All right. So we have this ramps up fast, obviously, and global connections, external monies coming in from all over. So now it's you also have oil money that's funding it. Can you introduce the idea of the Cartel del Sol, right? And then also when Dominion comes in, try and give us the background of those two and how the fusion begins there.
Okay. So basically when Hugo Chavez took power in Venezuela, he nationalized. The first thing he did, one of the most important things he did, was he nationalized the petroleum industry, which was huge. So suddenly the petroleum industry was private before. It was run by a country called PDVSA, and he nationalized PDVSA. So he put all of his people in key positions in PDVSA. Of course, the company didn't do as well with these kind of untrained loyalists in power, but he had access to the money that they were making, which is trillions of dollars a year. In addition to that, with the guidance of Fidel Castro, he started to create a criminal organization using the Venezuelan military called Cartel del Soles, and they call it that because Sol is a sun, and on the uniforms of the Venezuelan military, on their epaulets, instead of stars, they have suns.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, he turned the whole military into a cartel organization. And with the cooperation of the FARC in Colombia, which is a guerrilla organization, they had Evo Morales in Bolivia, who was part of their coalition. So the cocaine was grown in Bolivia. It was processed in Colombia, grown in Bolivia under the protection of Evo Morales,
mm-hmm.
processed in Colombia in the jungle under the protection of the FARC and political allies of theirs within the Colombian government, which is a whole other story.
Right.
And then it was shipped on military, boats and planes into the United States. And so they were making at least $1 trillion just in the drug trade, and today are the biggest transnational criminal drug cartel in the world.
In the world, right? And with trillions of dollars in annuals. Trillions.
So they're powerful. Go ahead.
That was the thing that really kind of shook me, is that you always imagine that it's right. Colombia after the takedown of God, I'm forgetting his name right now, of those main cartels. Then it transferred the majority of power over to the Mexican cartels, and they've been in control of this thing the whole time. Yeah. When the reality is they're just I love how you describe them as taxi drivers, right? They're just transportation, and the real distribution king around the world is the Venezuelan government and military, and then the Cartels del Soles. And for me, like, you call them, what'd you call them? The Costco of cartels.
Yeah.
Explain that a little bit, and why is it so easy for them to gain access to international markets?
Well, they're partnering with the Mexican cartels. So the Mexican cartels have worked for years to develop a whole network, and other gangs, MS-13, they've developed a whole network of runners and dealers, right, and throughout the United States. I mean, I had I think it was like 2012, I was in Las Vegas at a security convention, and I was sitting at one night at dinner with the police chiefs of Louisiana, of New Orleans, Los Angeles, major. And I asked them at the time, I said, what is your biggest threat? And they went, well, it's not Middle Eastern terrorists. And I said, okay, what is it? And they said, the drug cartels, they're everywhere. And there was a mayor from Evansville, Illinois. And he said, yeah, last week, we arrested 2 Mexican guys in a shootout. And like 2 nights later, I got a phone call at home. My wife answered the phone, and it was, we need to talk to your husband. I got on the phone, and it was a guy with a, Mexican accent saying, sir, you picked up 2 of our friends. You need to release them. And he's like, what the hell are you talking about? How did you get my phone number? And, you're telling me to release, they're arrested for, a shootout in public. And they're like, you don't understand. We know where your kids go to school. We know where your wife works. And the guy was like stunned. I mean, the balls on these people, but they know their strength, and they exert it in communities all over our country. And, we've allowed this to happen.
Well, there's a whole other component in the legal system as well, being propped up by the Open Society Foundation and that funding, which is also linked. So let's pivot from the cartel influence now over to Dominion. When did Smartmatic / Sequoia, when did they partner up with Dominion, and how did they realize, all right, this was going to be from a legal aspect, this was the merger that was going to really be able to give us leverage? And then can you talk through some of the founders of Dominion, their relationships around the world?
Sure. So what started with Smartmatic, Smartmatic was very small and local. It was this Venezuelan-owned company. The first company they bought was called Sequoia. Sequoia had been around for 100 years. Their basic business was ATM machines, but they got into voting machines. So the Venezuelans bought Sequoia. When they applied for the contract in California to run elections in California through Sequoia, what I referred to before, the Secretary of State did an audit and said, no, we're not going to accept this company. So what they ended up doing is they ended up selling Sequoia. It made it look like they were selling Sequoia to Dominion. Dominion was this tiny election company that was running like an election in one district in Ontario, Canada, right? And suddenly, so they they're very clever. Everything is disguised, and so basically they end up taking over a company called Dominion and blowing it up into this, big election company and winning all these contracts in all the key election districts in the United States. And they decide we're going to use Dominion to run elections in the United States. And Smartmatic will be kind of our global company with the global reach, and we'll try to win contracts in other countries around the world through Smartmatic. So Smartmatic only runs one district in the United States, and that's Los Angeles County. And therefore, which is where I live, and it's so bad. And
it
no
pains me.
Republican will ever win an election in Los Angeles as long as Smartmatic's here.
It pains me. My whole family, well, half of my family's been in California and Pasadena for 40, 45 years. My brother lived out there for 30 years before he moved to New York. I was stationed out there 7.5 years, and man, it was one of the greatest places on earth that you could ever visit, and you could just see the deterioration, and the fact that Karen Bass, who is a avowed Marxist, had been to Cuba for her training, is now the mayor of Los Angeles, and what we're seeing. I mean, it's just, I don't know, like, what's staggering to me, I guess, and I guess there's a cognitive dissonance that's been built into the consciousness of American citizens now. So even though you see it with your own eyes, you're either too afraid to say anything as a result of the, decade-long fear campaign of cancellation, or you just what can I do? I don't have a say, right? And so people allowed to come off, and it's almost like this is the story that will be the trigger to get it going, right? Because once you realize the magnitude of the nefariousness, it really begins to grow in a powerful.
I deal with this almost on a daily basis. I mean, I have been here. I have lived here for 20 years. I'm originally from New York, but as you say, David, I have just seen, the disintegration of the whole, city and the public structure of the city. And people, it's weird. People accept it.
Yes.
As you say, they either don't know what to do, or they're so brainwashed and afraid to step out and complain about it. And another part of it is that people have the media and kind of the forces behind the scenes, they've politicized everything. So it's like if you criticize, Karen Bass or her handling of, for example, the fires last year, earlier this year, you go, you're a Trump guy, right?
Or a racist, right?
Or a racist or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, no, I don't care who I don't really care what your political affiliation is. If you're good at what you do,
right.
And
it's about competence and corruption. That's right.
Right. Yeah. Right. I'm fine. I'm open-minded, but it's just a weird thing. And that's why I keep telling people, hey, look, this isn't political. It's really an attack on our country. Yeah. And as you mentioned before, it's aided by a lot of NGOs that have been funded by Venezuela and China. One of the things that the whistleblowers found out was that George Soros and the Open Societies Foundation, a lot of their money comes from Venezuela and China. So they directly supports a lot of celebrities in Hollywood, whose names I can't reveal, but you can imagine who they are. And, with big amounts of money, and organizations like Black Lives Matter and so on. And so much of the disruption that we've seen over the last, decade is artificial. It's not organic.
Right.
It has been, funded. It is deliberate, and it's
part of the warfare. It's part of the war.
That's right. Exactly.
Right. All right. Can you take us and connect us from Dominion senior leadership, i.e. Mark Malloch Brown, over to the Open Society Foundation?
Okay. So Mark Malloch Brown is a very, close associate and good friend of George Soros. He has always, he also had a close association with Hugo Chavez. He's been a guy who, you could describe him as a globalist. He's very much of that philosophy, and he was the president of Smartmatic. After the 2020 election, he was awarded with the presidency of the Open Society Foundations. So the connection between the two is very obvious and out in the open, really. But it's just weird, David. It's like the press doesn't look at any of this stuff. Like the whole idea of having investigative journalism, which is so important in a society like ours, it has disappeared. These are all major, important phenomena that we need to be that people should have been made aware of. But it's all cloaked now in, well, if you even look at it, you're a conspiracy theorist. That's right. There's no conspiracy here. This is hard information. That's what is so brilliant about what Gary and Martine have done. Gary is a CIA operations officer. He builds cases by, and has in his career and is trained to do that by, you find the terrorist group or the criminal conspiracy and you penetrate it. You find sources within the conspiracy and you either pay them money or you threaten, you come work with us, give us information about how this conspiracy works. That's what they did here. So
and I think that's what people, I think, people read a book and they go, oh, he's a journalist. This is all hearsay. These guys aren't real investigators. It's also sensational. There's a global conspiracy to control worldwide elections. That's ridiculous. It involves cartels in China and, and people are so overwhelmed by that reality. But you're right. And if you look at both Gary and Martine, these are world-class investigators, people that have been at the tip of the spear in particular in Central and South America. And what I think, we've become, I think the American public became so aligned with a singular threat coming from the Middle East
Yes.
post 9/11, which I believe was all intentional to distract us from what our regional worries were, which was the rise and growth of communism and socialism at scale with our South American and Central American partners.
David, you're right on the mark. Yeah. So a lot of this happened because all of the focus was on the Middle East. And so our intelligence agencies were they were penetrated, and there's a lot of corruption involved. But it gave Cuba and Venezuela and China, kind of an opening because the focus wasn't on Latin America, and what was allowed to grow and penetrate us further is something that at this point it's choking us. If we don't solve this problem now, I don't know, what our country will be like in the future. I don't know.
Well, we won't have a country. We will devolve into a tyranny that will require, civil war at a minimum, right?
All right. The point I want to make that's so important that you brought up before is that these guys are not. They're not theorists. They're not. They're not promoting any point of view. They're basically just investigators. And they tripped upon this. They were in Venezuela investigating money laundering in Venezuela. That's what they were doing. And they were recruiting sources within the criminal cartel, within the Cartel del Sol, and so on and so forth. And those people were the ones who were telling them, hey, we also do election fraud. And Martine and Gary were like, what are you talking about? We're not interested in that. We're looking to find out where the drug money has been stashed in different banks. Right. And they kept bringing it up. And then when the 2020 election happened, and it was so odd. Right. And these guys kept saying, well, we know why. They said, all right, let's put everything else aside and investigate this. And they spent their own money and their own time, and they investigated it for 3 years. And
that's what I think that's what people have to understand. This was not done, whipped together in a 6-month period, and the magnitude of credibility that these two have in recruiting. And that's recruiting a source or an asset or a subsource or a walk-in or whatever. A walk-in's, it is what it is. But the rest, that is an art form.
It's an art form.
It really is. It is an art form. And human intelligence, in my opinion, there's no better intelligence in the world, because electronic intelligence can be manipulated, whatever it is. But human intelligence, and they went out and they have recruited dozens, if I'm correct, right? Dozens of people from all over these places that have shared this information. I think the one that really hit me the hardest was the story of Frank Holder. Can you describe who Frank Holder is and the role he's played in this?
Okay, so Frank Holder is a former, he went to the Air Force Academy. He's a Mormon. Very clever man. They call him Super Cop. The Venezuelans call him Super Cop. He basically is a Cuban agent first, then was recruited by the Venezuelans and became sort of the paymaster of the Cartel del Soles. So he was controlling a budget of trillions of dollars a year. And was able to, and he became a CIA source as well. So he was basically, when the CIA wanted to know what was going on in Latin America, they were relying on Frank Holder because, of course, he certainly had, good, lots of information that he could supply them with, but he had an agenda behind it. And he was able to corrupt many officials in the State Department and our intelligence service, and that is all being, I can't name their names, but one of them was Manuel Roca, the same two whistleblowers discovered. He had been a high official in the State Department, an ambassador. He served in the NSC in the White House, and he had been a Cuban spy for 40 years. He is now in federal prison, and he's just one of one of dozens of people like him, even in higher positions. So the Cubans, who are very good at this, there's another woman was named Ana Montes. Her story, she was a head of the head analyst for the Department of Defense Intelligence Service. She was a Cuban agent. So the penetration of our government is startling. Like that's another whole aspect of this. But all of this information has been found and discovered through recruiting sources, right? And they point you to, hey, look at this guy, Frank Holder. Well, Frank Holder, he managed to position himself to kind of control all the independent, like, security companies in the United States, Kroll International, Berkeley Research Group. So whenever there was a study done on Latin America or what's going on in Venezuela, he was helping to write the report because he was either the president or in control of the Latin American division. I'll give you one example. In 2020, when the Trump campaign was convinced that there had been some, funny business going on in the election, who did they hire? They hired Frank Holder, who at the time was the head of the Berkeley Research Group. And so they didn't know who Frank Holder was. Everybody assumed if you want to know what's going on in Latin America, call Frank Holder. Well, Frank Holder's a Cuban spy. He's a Venezuelan source. And what does Berkeley Research Group come back with in their report? There was no irregularities.
Safest election in U.S. history. Safest, right.
And this is, of course, reported on the front page of the Washington Post and so on. Like, those guys are nuts. Anybody who thinks that there was any irregularities in the election. We have the definitive source. Well, your source is a Cuban spy. So, this is what we're up against.
One of the fascinating things to me, and what really, I think what Gary talked about this in the interview is when he was leading the charge in South America to try and stem the tide of this growing socialism, the new, whatever new form of communism it is, right? And, he's fighting, in Bolivia, he's all over the place. And then what was it when, I think it was in 2012 or sometime shortly after Obama's second election comes in, and then they were told to all stand down. Yeah. And then Martin had a group within their special operations division of the DEA. They had talked about having like 11 people. And then after this, they went down to one person. Yeah. So essentially these people that were in the fight were told, hey, the fight's over. We're not focused on that anymore. Yeah. And so that was, for me, that was a big part of the validation of the forced shift to look away from what's taking place.
Yeah. So Gary was, when I first met Gary, he was the station chief, CIA station chief in Bolivia. That's 2005. And he was basically told back then, we want you to back off of any investigations into Cuba. Well, Gary, as a station chief in Bolivia, he's fighting with the Cubans because the Cubans are there with the Evo Morales government expanding drug trafficking throughout Central and South America and the United States. And Gary was like, what the hell are you guys talking about? Why? They're the enemy. We're actively fighting them here in Bolivia, and you know it. And you're coming from Washington and telling me to back down? And he and one other station chief, I think the station chief in Ecuador, were horrified. The other ones were kind of like, okay, if this is what's the direction that's coming down from Washington, I guess we'll comply. But
wow,
it was an early sign of how deep the penetration was, even back in 2005. Right?
well, and that's another thing that I think people in the United States kind of dismiss or don't pay attention to, that our State Department employees, our Department of Defense employees, Department of War employees, our law enforcement, Homeland, FBI, CIA, they're actively being recruited around the world at all times. I remember, my first, when I first was getting ready to deploy overseas with the agency, and you get this little class on like, hey, this is what you have to pay attention to. These types of people here doing this and that. And I was like, oh, wow, yeah, this is real espionage stuff. And, that's the core of what's taking place. And imagine, whereas, back in World War II or during the Cold War, right, espionage had a component where the result was kinetic, right? It could lead to nuclear war or mass confrontations like you're seeing in Ukraine and in Russia. But now espionage is relative, like, hey, we can pay you exorbitant amounts of money and no one gets killed. It's just the slow, gradual turning away or relinquishing of your liberties through the elections and putting these bad actors in positions where they can start to ignore the laws of the land. And I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, well, as citizens, I think very few people really understand how the CIA works and how the FBI works. But a big part of their mission is counterintelligence, right? Mm-hmm. So you're constantly checking to make sure that your service is not penetrated by foreign actors, which, as you just pointed out, that's where they focus all their energy. That's what they're trained to do. That's what our CIA agents overseas are trained to do. They make friends. They go to cocktail parties and they make friends with their Cuban or Soviet Russian counterparts or Chinese counterparts. They have been much better at it than we have, and that's the shocking part, is that here are two guys who are independent, whistleblowers with amazing backgrounds, yes, but they found something we pay trillions of dollars in taxes to these intelligence agencies to track. And they didn't see it, and it's like, what an immense failure by our intelligence service that you had to depend on two guys who are just patriots to stumble over this. Yeah.
I think the irony of your involvement is so so substantial. Like Jawbreaker, right? The crux of that whole thing was, when Gary and his team and the Delta guys and Tora Bora are like, all right, we're an hour away from them, let's go. And, like, just give us a Ranger battalion to shut the border off. And then all of a sudden, there's this standoff and we want more money and we're not going to give you the Rangers. And then the next thing you know, ISI starts doing airlifts and brings out the entire headshed of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, bin Laden, and they live in Pakistan for the next 10 years, and that's just one aspect. And that's like the major focus we're spending. But obviously you're spending $8 trillion, nobody's going to shut that spigot off. And when you start to allow your mind to extrapolate the potentiality of what controlling global elections means, it really becomes a staggering shift in consciousness. It goes back to, all I ever see is Klaus Schwab, saying, the fourth industrial revolution is coming and you must prepare and you will owe nothing and like it. And so how big is this? How worldwide, how big is it? How much proof do we know it's taking place around the world right now?
David, it's unfortunately, it's huge. Smartmatic runs elections in 72 countries around the
Oh.
world. All the major countries in the world are using Smartmatic software.
Mm-hmm.
And we've a number of countries, leaders of countries have come to us and said, we think our election was stolen. I mean, we're three guys. I mean, we don't have the capacity to investigate everything, but we basically tell them, like the president of Georgia near Russia. They had a referendum last year, and they were convinced it was stolen. They had riots there, and they came to us and they went, "Do you think we're like? Are you? Yeah, they were using Smartmatic voting machines. Sure, they stole it. Russia's
we saw
part of this. Yeah,
Romania, right? We
Yeah.
saw and then the one that just is so obvious to me was Brazil getting Lula back in.
yeah,
And I don't know if you followed Mike Benz at all, but he found the USAID money that was
Well, that's
funneling. Would you talk about that? Because
Sure.
that
So,
at the end of the book, when I was going through that piece, I was like, oh my God, we're funding this too.
That's
All
right.
the major countries
Yeah.
that want this type of control over people are participating in this. So
Yeah,
could you
so-
discuss that?
Okay, so during Doge, one of the first things they looked at was USAID, right? And what they found was that there was an organization called CEPS. It's called the Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening. They were getting billions of dollars, I think total $8 or $9 billion through USAID grants. And basically, they were the marketing wing of Smartmatic.
Mm-hmm.
So they were going into countries and marketing through our embassies, telling countries, pressuring companies to accept Smartmatic voting machines. I'm working on another book, a follow-up book now, where there's some case studies, and one of them is from Guatemala.
Mm-hmm.
And in Guatemala, the U.S. ambassador and people in the embassy were basically twisting the arms of the Guatemalan government and saying you have to, and they didn't want it. And they were basically like, if you don't accept this software, you're going to have trouble with the United States. And it's like, what the hell? And the taxpayers, we're paying for that.
That's right. That's right.
So
All
we're
of it.
paying for criminals who are trying to take over our country and destroy our country to perpetuate and expand their reach around the world.
Wow.
I mean,
it's really quite staggering.
It is. It's staggering. It's staggering. And when you see that, you go, oh my God. And then you look at the people who are, on their board, and do they know what they were involved in?
Of course they do.
Aaron Bass, Marco Rubio, who's Secretary of State. It's like, we got a big problem. We got a big problem, massive.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about, all right. So the three of you, obviously you referenced that Gary and Martine have approached the Bureau. They've approached the DNI. They've approached all these agencies recently too.
Yes.
What has taken place with those parlays?
All right. So initially, before the Trump administration, the answer they were basically getting from Republicans and Democrats was, we don't want to see your evidence, or you guys are crazy. You better leave the country. You're going to get exposed. You're going to get thrown in jail, right? And there was an active FBI investigation of Gary and Martine. We know that now. After the Trump administration, the atmosphere changed. The FBI and the Justice Department in particular took all the information that Gary and Martine had found, including interviewing their sources, and they did their own investigation, and they found everything to be 100% legitimate.
Wow.
The problem is they're moving really, really slow. And we don't know why they're moving really slow. I don't know. I mean, there's definitely a push and pull within the administration. Some people are, don't want this information to be made public. But it's all been checked out. It's all been investigated. Elon Musk has looked at it. Mm-hmm. My concern right now is that this story is sort of being buried and ignored. And the president, even though he has tweeted about, we got to do something about election fraud, he's not particularly focusing on this information, which needs to be disseminated to the American public. As you said from the beginning, there isn't a more important story probably ever. This is a takeover of our country from within using the techniques of hybrid warfare. And if we don't root it out, if we don't talk about it and spread the news, we're gonna be kind of helpless here. And what's shocked me is that nobody except for Lara Logan, God bless her, and people like you, God bless you, are taking up the story. Like the mainstream media, they're still talking about Epstein, and it's like. Yep. NBC, everybody. Now, are they all part of this conspiracy? Have they all been paid off? It makes you wonder. Mm-hmm. I mean, even the president, I'm like, why are you not on television talking about this? You're talking. I
mean, when you look at
the coast of Venezuela, but why aren't you explaining to the American people why they're there? Right. Why this regime is so dangerous? I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, I think obviously, and you had talked about it. There are so many problems that Trump was facing when he came into office, and yes. First and foremost, the number one was the invasion. You had to stop that. Yeah. Second is I think to expose kind of the icy corruption. Bringing Doge in, getting, I think hacking away at USAID was monstrous, an annual $50 billion budget to run these types of programs. That was massive. To continue funding the government, that was a big one. And then, obviously the Epstein challenge is a more nefarious kind of money laundering reality than anything. And I think, that's, and I think, Epstein was a fixer, just like I think Holder is a fixer, just like all these other people work for the intelligence agencies and are fixers in some capacity. So it goes beyond, what but this, I agree with you, is the biggest story. And for me, this is going to be, the focus of what I'm going to really try and drill down on.
Thank you.
I had a gentleman, Professor David Clements, who was huge. Yeah. So David came on. We're going to release his show and your show. I'm not sure which one's going first, but probably you will go first, and then we'll deliver his, to drill down. And then he's given me a few more names that I'm going to try, and I'm just going to keep doing it. And because I agree, this is the crux. If we don't get our elections back, nothing else matters. The whole game is over.
Exactly.
All right. So what do you guys? What's your plan moving forward now? How do you just keep the pressure on the different agencies, keep going and talking about, or a follow-up book? Like what's your focus now moving forward?
Well, I'm working on a follow-up book which will talk about the different components of hybrid warfare, how they've been used, the whole counterintelligence aspect of this, and so how they recruited people, who these people are, and the influence that they had. So I'm working on that now. We have Gary and Martine have shared a lot of this, all of this information with the administration, but they're frustrated, as I am, with the slow pace of movement.
Right.
And so, you know, I can tell your listeners that there are some people within the administration who are just as alarmed as we are. And then there are other people who seem to be resisting this. And, you know, it's troubling, right? So part of our mission now, and, you know, is to spread the word to the public, because ultimately the public has to decide if this is important enough for them to pressure congressmen, pressure senators, put the media at task. I mean, David, one thing that's so important is that, you know, in a society like ours, the public needs to be informed about what the real issues are and what's going on. And our press has failed and continues to fail so badly. And so people are at such a disadvantage. They don't really understand. Everything's couched, like I said before, in terms of politics. And this is like, no, this isn't politics. These are foreign enemies who are trying to undermine our country for their nefarious purposes. And they're actively doing that. And we need to, you know, pressure our government and our officials and our press and everybody else. Like, hey, this is important to us. We want to keep this country the way it is. We want our votes to count. We don't want our elections determined by, you know, some officials in Venezuela or China. I mean, and if there is, you know, if there's something, it just all needs to be examined and investigated. You know, I put the book out. Nobody has come back and said, well, this is all, you know, I've looked into this. This is not real. You know, like I say, it's been investigated by the FBI, by the DOJ. But this has to be number one in everybody's mind. Like, hey, before we do anything else, we need to take care of this. And if our elected officials won't do it, let's get a new batch that will, because this is our concern, right? And so we're trying to communicate that message now.
And I think you're doing an outstanding job, Ralph. I just am so grateful for once again for your courage of supporting Gary and Martine. They are real patriots. They truly believe in this country. They have served this country at the highest level, and you know, they see what's at stake, and as do I. So you've got another friend to help support in any way I can. I'm going to continue banging this drum. Obviously, if there's ever anybody that was in your world, or one last question, have you guys considered to deliver the PowerPoint presentation, that 4-hour presentation, to the public? Have you guys considered doing that yet?
Sure. I mean, you know, basically the book is like you've got the book in front of you. Mm-hmm. A lot of the slides from the PowerPoint presentation are in the book. So it's based on the PowerPoint presentation. So I'm sort of like taking readers through it and explaining, exactly.
Got it.
That's what
those were just phenomenal. I mean, that was really the thing, you know, because you read a section that includes, you know, these just mind-boggling realities, and then you see a slide with the actual data and facts right there in front of you, and you're just like, oh my! I mean, it's all right there.
It's all right there.
It's all right there.
So it's you know, the information is there. It's been shared with the administration, as I say. You know, we're waiting for them to act. You know, we're waiting for them to act.
Well, I think we'll all just start building this groundswell. We'll start recruiting other patriots. We'll start talking about it more. I know it's going to be the focus for me up into these midterms. And I just once again want to just commend you on just a really incredible story, an incredible book, but more so your courage as a patriot and the service that you're giving this country to help prolong our liberty and our reality, quite frankly. So, Ralph, thank you.
Yeah, they're really trying to change our reality. They're brainwashing people. They're pushing agendas and trying to pretend that they're positive when they're not. I mean, these people are. But if you read the book and you understand where it's coming from, it puts it all in context. And David, thank you so much for what you do. I'm honored to be here and to get to know you. It's really wonderful. Yeah.
Well, thank you, sir.
We need more people like you, and let's build a groundswell of support, and let our elected officials and law enforcement and so on help. Hey, we need your help with this. We don't want to be part of China and Russia and Venezuela and Cuba. Like, no, that's not who we are.
It's not who we're ever going to be. That's for sure.
That's right.
God bless you, Ralph. Take care. And
God bless you, David.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.